Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining and welcome to another session of WeWork Labs Leadership Academy. For those of you who are new to us today, WeWork Labs Leadership Academy is a 3-month personal growth bootcamp aimed at transforming our WeWork members into more impactful leaders. And today's session is titled Leaning into Diversity and Inclusion. And we have with us today one of the most important thought leaders on this topic, LinkedIn top voice and career success coach, Jennifer Tardy. Jennifer, we're so happy to have you with us today. I would like to give a little bit of background on Jennifer. She owns and operates JTC, which is a diversity and inclusion consulting organization in Maryland. Through her career success coaching programs for job seekers and diversity hiring training programs for recruiters, Jennifer is on a mission to make it easy for recruiters and historically underrepresented job seekers to meet and forge career success. She's an official partner to LinkedIn and the Society for Diversity, where she serves as a career coach to its members. Jennifer has vast industry experience as a recruiting thought leader, diversity practitioner, and career success coach with over 14 years of experience in the field of HR and recruiting. She has recruited in the tech, healthcare, education, railroad, plumbing supplies, and professional services industry. Jennifer is also the co-owner of a mental health counseling organization that provides mental health skill building services to help individuals cope with mental illness and achieve community stability and independence. And now, without further ado, we're so happy to have you with us, Jennifer. The Zoom stage is yours.
I so appreciate that. And thank you for having me. So let's see, I need to share my screen. I need permission. It says that, okay, there we go. And let me get this on up here. This is always the fun part where you have to like show your technical know-how. All right, Stephanie, can you see my screen? Thumbs up. Perfect. Perfect. Okay. So I am so excited to be here. Thank you to you, Stephanie, and to WeWork Labs for inviting me to talk about such an important topic. So today I get to talk about leaning into diversity and inclusion. And the way in which I'm going to do that is that I'd like to take you on a journey of what it feels like to be ambitious and different. So those two words were the game changers of my life. And to be more specific, it's what it feels like to be ambitious, but to always be perceived as different. And so, and then after I talk to you a little bit about my story, then we're going to talk about how you can get started to create inclusion in your own space as well too. So I like to do, just a quick check. I am going to pull out this chat for a second. So if you are ready to get started, and if that sounds good to you, give me a quick yes in the chat box. Because sometimes doing these webinars, I can only see me. And there we go. Let's go. And I will represent the DMV. I saw that in the chat box earlier as well too. So perfect. One of the ways, and I'll actually skip over this because Stephanie did a really good job of talking about my background, but one of the pieces that I really want to emphasize is that I'm a recruiter at heart, and I actually had to leave the recruiting space to build this firm so that I could help to make it easier for job seekers to navigate the bias in the hiring process and for employers to learn what they can start, stop, and continue doing in order to remove that bias too. So I knew the journey was on both ends, and I had to step away from corporate America to really do my part to help to increase diversity overall. So now, a moment ago, I said that I'm going to start by taking you on a journey of what it feels like, again, to be ambitious and different. But again, that point of clarification is that the story is about being ambitious and feeling different and often being perceived as different because of how we perceive the idea of diversity. So I want you to remember one thing as we move through this talk. This is the one prerequisite, is that diversity means different. Diversity is in context to a group, not a person, period. And one of the phrases that I always share with people is that diversity is not because of me, diversity is because of us, right? Now, I'll tell you about 4 different occasions where I began to feel this. And the very first time that I ever felt what I call the difference is when I was in high school. And when I took in high school, I took my first advanced class. It was advanced biology. And on the first day of class, I looked around and everyone in my class was white. I was terrified and I had no reason to justify why I felt so afraid. And so my knee-jerk reaction at the time was to simply just drop the class. And so, but what happened was when I went up to my teacher to disenroll from that class, she really didn't let me. And it was sort of like she knew, but we both allowed things to kind of remain unspoken. But I'm actually very thankful that she did not allow me to drop out of the class, because what I didn't realize is that it prepared me for the next time that actual feeling popped up in my life. So the second time that I felt this feeling again, this feeling of because I've taken this ambition of being perceived as different, was when I stepped onto the campus of Virginia Tech. And there are two numbers that I won't forget. One number was 26,000 and the other number was 4%. So the 26,000 represented the students at the time at Virginia Tech. That 4% represented people of color. So this was a significant moment for me because it was the first time that someone gave me the words to describe what I had been feeling. So even back in high school, and it was called culture shock, which is the feeling of disorientation when you enter a new and unfamiliar culture or way of life. So because there were so few of us on campus, there was actually even this thing called the nod, where Black people nodded to one another in passing, no matter what. So whenever, I don't care if it was in a group, if we were passing each other and we noticed each other, we would nod. And this was our way of saying that even in the largest of crowds, you were seen. So even going back to that number, those two numbers, 26,000 and 4%, when I said that 4% were people of color, that didn't mean that 4% were Black students. So it was even a smaller percentage of Black students, which is why someone pulled me to the side and explained to me the nod. It was like, I see you no matter where you are. And so the third time that I felt this feeling was I was working in different industries that happened to be historically male-dominated and white. So I had worked in the energy industry, plumbing supplies, railroad, right? And so just as curious as I was at that time with, where are all the Black people in my company and in this industry, I also started wondering, where are all the women? Where were my people? Where was my community? Where's my safe space where it feels okay and even acceptable to bring my whole self to work? And then the fourth time that I felt this difference was when I entered leadership. It was another pivotal milestone for me. And now I'm privy to these behind closed door conversations among leaders who look nothing like me, but they were discussing the career trajectories of people who identified similarly to me. And these people were typically people that they barely knew and that they deeply misunderstood. So on this journey, not only did I have to navigate these new external ambitions that I had, whereby I'm taking advanced classes, I'm going to college, I'm progressing within my career path, and ultimately I'm entering leadership, I also had to navigate all of the experiences that came along with it. And ultimately, I had to make it to the top of my profession in order to see that this experience of being ambitious and perceived as different didn't just affect me, so many others face this same obstacle course that's infused with this question of enoughness, right? It's always asking, am I enough for this ambition? And also being surrounded by people who questioned, is she enough for this ambition? And it was all because there wasn't representation of people who looked like me historically, and even in that case, presently. Does that make sense? Drop me a yes if that makes sense to you. Yes, absolutely. Good, 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 good. Okay, so now, keep in mind that I didn't share my story with you just now because I want anyone to feel sad because of my experience. This lived experience is what led me here doing the work that we do today in JTC, or Jennifer Tardy Consulting. But the reason why I shared my story is because I want you to know what populations that are historically underrepresented in the workplace often feel or experience just as I did. And so I knew that I wanted to make change so that future generations wouldn't have to experience the same. But I also knew that in order to affect that change, that there were things that I needed to do to take action. So when we started to do the work once we actually started doing the work to increase representation, to create an inclusive environment, I like to start with this one quote by James Baldwin. It's one of my favorite quotes, which says that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's actually faced. So to effectively promote diverse and inclusive work environments, it actually requires you to see things as they are in reality, rather than the ideal. And so, and it's ironic that I just finished a training class about an hour ago where we were talking about an ideal versus reality. And so as we begin to say, oh, we have a great work culture here. And so I would say, okay, well, maybe that's an ideal, that the ideal culture for us is that it's one in which everyone feels like they can bring their whole self to work. Everyone feels included. But then I'd say, well, what is the reality? When you begin to look at your workforce today, who can bring their whole selves to work without worrying about discrimination or feeling excluded? Who gets access to the best opportunities and the most coveted positions? Who feels like when they speak up that people are actually listening? And so that's the difference between saying, here's talking about an ideal versus culture versus talking about the environment, the reality. And so it requires you to see things as they are. And a part of that means that we have to use data to have real conversations about real experiences that impact all the populations within your organization. And when you're ready to do the work, there are 4 things that you can do when it comes to leaning in to the value of diversity. Or in other words, I'm going to show you the steps that you need to take to go all in to do your part to increase diversity and promote inclusion overall. All right, so how to lean in to the value of diversity. I'm going to tell you up front, and then I'm going to unpack these for you. The first one, which is a prerequisite, which is check yourself. The second one is get support. The third one is take action. And the fourth one is measure impact. So let's talk about each one of these things. Now, I can tell you, honestly and very transparently, that when I started my own educational journey in this field of D&I, I'll never forget what the instructor said to me. Well, not to me, what the instructor said to the whole class. She said that the very first step that every practitioner learns is that when they're entering diversity and inclusion is to check yourself. And when she said that, I was like, me? Check myself? Like, what does that mean? And so as she unpacked it, what it really meant was this work begins at a personal level. And I actually found that to be very true for me too, because I never really thought about it that way. I had to be honest with myself about my feelings as it related to people who identified uniquely to me. And so I want to invite you to do the same. I want you to think about it this way. What holds you back from feeling qualified, capable, and comfortable in talking about concepts related to diversity and inclusion? What if it's something that you have yet to even unpack? I've actually had leaders in my training programs that share that they've actually gone as far as confirming that they feel a level of resistance, but this was the first time when they were actually doing some of these exercises that they did the work to unpack it. So again, that's where I want to invite you to do this work. It's as simple as asking yourself, where do I feel resistance? Where do I feel resistance internally? When you think about people who identify uniquely to you, what thoughts come to mind for you, whether they're positive or negative? And then here's another question for you to ponder. When it comes to people who identify uniquely to you, what subjects do you avoid? Or what subjects do you take too lightly because you don't really feel like, you're qualified to talk about those topics? And if you think about this even outside of the world of diversity and inclusion, think about it this way. Has there ever been a conversation that you avoided because you didn't feel as though you had the right language to use, or you didn't know about the subject and you were afraid that you were going to say something that wasn't really that smart? Or maybe when you were talking about things related to diversity, you weren't sure whether I should say Black or African American, and you didn't want to embarrass yourself. You didn't want to embarrass other people. You didn't want to get your company in trouble. You didn't want to lose your job. I mean, there are so many things that are going on inside of us that creates resistance to us leaning all the way into this work. And when you felt those things, when you were in that space, what did you wind up doing? And most people, myself included, when I don't feel qualified, capable, or even comfortable, we just don't engage. Especially if we don't have to, especially if we're not being held accountable for our engagement, we just don't engage. And I also find that this is also what keeps people away from engaging in dialogue around diversity and inclusion. No one wants to be that person that says something offensive, stupid, or even something that can be interpreted as maybe racist. So I get it, checking yourself can be a personal journey. Checking yourself is important, but what's more important, and I really want you to actually, I want you to write this one down if you have a pencil and paper. What's more important is to check yourself without judgment. This is the only way to move beyond guilt. And because what happens is, the reason why we go in this loop where we're able to confirm that there is resistance, but we don't really take the steps to move beyond it, is because we get locked in this guilt where we're like, okay, so I know why I'm feeling resistance here, and I shouldn't feel that way. And I'm ashamed of myself for feeling this way. And how dare I feel this way? And so in order for us to move beyond that step, we have to be able to say, okay, this is the resistance. I'm not going to judge myself, or I'm not going to get locked into the guilt around this. And then I'm going to move on to the next step. And so let's talk about the next thing that's important. Getting support. So most people can get to a place where they can acknowledge, right, again, that there's resistance. And again, few can get to a place of unpacking their personal resistance without judgment. But I want you to push beyond both groups. And I really want you to get to a place where you get support to help to eliminate your resistance. What are you going to do about your resistance now that you know it's there? For some, getting support means that you need more education. For others, getting support means that maybe you need therapy. Maybe there are just some things that have gone unresolved, or there are just some deeply rooted triggers that maybe you need some therapy. And I say to people all the time that the next time you find yourself saying or feeling like, I don't like that person, for example, next time try replacing the word like with understand. It's highly likely that you may not like me because you don't understand me. You don't understand why I would make the decisions that I make, especially when they're the opposite of how you would make that same decision. That's one bonus tip that I want to throw in there, as you're working toward, your own level of support. But to bridge a divide or to curb your resistance, you can also get exposure, meaning create more understanding of yourself and of other people. Familiarity is a word that I teach often. We feel less resistance in places that feel familiar to us. As a matter of fact, one of the quotes that I share often in my classes is that one of the longest journeys that you're going to take in life is the journey from, let me say this again. One of the longest journeys that you're going to take in life is the journey beyond what feels most familiar to you. One of the longest journeys you're going to take in your own life are the journeys beyond what feels most familiar to you. So I challenge you to turn your resistance into something that feels familiar. And even as I begin thinking about my own areas of resistance, and I talk about this too in some of my webinars, that when I first started my business around Jennifer Tardy Consulting, our whole business was around helping Black job seekers. It was a familiar space. I felt qualified, capable, and comfortable to do that work. And then as more people began coming to me and saying, hey, Jen, the information that you're putting out there really resonates with me. I'm feeling that I'm coming up against my own hurdles and barriers, and I'd like to engage you in helping me as well too. Then I started thinking, I need to further expand the scope of our expertise around understanding those hurdles that historically underrepresented populations face. So to be clear, I support all job seekers. Everyone experiences their own challenges in getting a job. But at JTC, our expertise is really around understanding the hurdles that impact historically underrepresented populations. And when I say historically underrepresented populations, I'm speaking to women, people of color, people with disabilities, people who identify as LGBTQIA, and the veteran population as well too. And so when I began to unpack, and so as I began to expand the scope of the services and the expertise that we offer, I felt that moment where there was some resistance. And I had to ask myself, where do I feel resistance, number one? And when I asked myself that question, it was around the idea of supporting people with disabilities. It was around the idea of supporting people with disabilities. And then I had to move beyond my own guilt and ask myself the question, what is it about the idea of supporting people with disabilities that is bringing up this level of resistance in me? Why do I not feel qualified, capable, and confident or comfortable in doing this work? And then it goes back to familiarity. At the time, it did not feel familiar to me, the lived experience of people with disabilities. But after identifying the area of resistance and then getting educated and gaining exposure around it, I realized that the gap for me, especially in the Black culture, the Black community, is that when we think about disabilities, because you have physical disabilities, and then you also have serious mental illness, which is considered a disability as well too, that a lot of mental illness went undiagnosed in my community. And so it didn't feel familiar to me because it was never diagnosed, therefore it was never really named. To me growing up, it was just cousin Sharon or Priscilla. It wasn't that someone may have had a serious mental illness like depression, bipolar disorder, and it was just who they were. Or if I had a cousin who may have had a cognitive impairment, right? Then that was my cousin, and we grew up learning to not ask questions, not stare, and so I was stunted in that area. But I would have never gotten to a place where I removed that resistance for myself until I became more educated. And then beginning to more deeply immerse myself around experts who were able to talk about, just the different types of disabilities and things of that nature. So I hope that my transparency with my own story helps you to feel more empowered to begin unpacking and thinking about your own areas of resistance too. So step 2 is about getting support. Step 3 is about actually taking action, which makes me think about how after the deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, I started getting a lot of calls from friends and peers that felt overwhelmed with emotion and even paralyzed in wanting to know what they could do to take action that affects real change. And I'll share with you what I've shared with them. Thinking about what you can do personally to affect positive change can feel overwhelming. And I tell people it can almost feel like how do you end world hunger? It feels that massively overwhelming, especially as we begin thinking about, systemic, like things that are systemic by nature. So I always start with, why don't you begin by thinking about your role, your job, and ask yourself, how can I use my role and all of the access and power and influence associated with my role to make real change? What do I have the power to influence because of the access I'm granted due to the position that I hold? No matter your level or your role, there's power in your job title. So let me give you a for instance here. As I'm training recruiters and hiring leaders, I ask them, what can you start doing, stop doing, and continue doing to ensure that more women, people of color, veterans, the LGBTQ+ communities, and people with disabilities gain more access to opportunities to work at your organization and to get promoted, right? So it's not just about gaining access to enter your organization, but it's also gaining access to get promoted. And so here's an example. So as a recruiter, I can start learning more about how bias shows up in recruiters so that I can better recognize it when it presents itself in me. One thing that I can stop only sourcing and recruiting at places that are deeply overrepresented with populations that are also underrepresented at my company. Let me say this again. I can stop only sourcing and recruiting at places that are overrepresented with populations that are already overrepresented in my company. And I can begin sourcing in organizations that are overrepresented with populations that are underrepresented in my company. One thing that I can continue doing is checking myself and my resistance. And that makes it more tangible, more action, oriented, things that I can empower myself to do with the role that I have. So think about it that way. Think about it by way of what can I do with my role and all of the influence and access that I have just because of the job title that I have. And think about, what is the power, access, and influence that I have. And then don't just think about it by way of what are things that I can start doing. I really want you to think about it by way of what can I also stop doing. This is one of the things that makes our training programs a little more unique. It's because we're not just talking to employers about, here's another place where you can go and source, but we're also saying, well, what are some of the things that are preventing people who are entering your organization from progressing through the interview process? Okay. And I see your message, Kelly. I cannot remember. I don't know what statement you're asking me to repeat, but if you drop something in the chat box, oh, perfect. I already answered it. Thank you. All right. So while we're talking about taking action, there are 3 actions that you can actually take now. So no matter where you are in the world, and even if you don't have direct access to the hiring process, like recruiters do, you have direct access to 3 very powerful actions. One is your ability to do your part to create an environment that is ready for increased diversity, right? Another one is your ability to create psychological safety. So, and then it's your ability to broaden your network to close the network gap. But let's talk a little bit more about creating an inclusive environment. Write this question down. Is my environment ready for increased diversity? And really think about the answer to that question. However you're considering increasing representation within your organization, get a sense of its readiness, because you can never truly increase diversity if employees are leaving your organization just as quickly as they're entering your organization, just as quickly as they're getting hired. And I say to people all the time, there's no way to increase diversity in your organization if people are exiting your organization as quickly as they're being hired. And so a part of checking for workplace readiness is evaluating the reality of your current environment. So again, we talked about culture being an ideal, but on the road to trying to reach that ideal, employees may experience different environments. So for example, your company culture could focus on caring more for your employees so that they will care more for their customers that they serve. But your peers' behavior, which may be another manager or leader, may demonstrate that they believe in deliverables first and then people, which means, people are disposable. Or maybe they show favoritism to certain employees and to the team. And neither is representative of caring for employees. And even though you and your peer work for the same organization, employees are leaving your peer's department just as fast as they join the organization. So my point in this example is that if you find that the environment is not ready or prepared for the type of diversity, for the type or level of representation that they're seeking, then work on improving the environment first. So the second thing, which I mentioned a second ago, was psychological safety. And that's your ability to show your team that you're paying attention and that you value their thoughts and their opinions. And you can do things like recapping their messages in a demonstration that you care enough to try to understand. So for instance, if someone on your team comes to you and they're saying that this is my experience, before saying to them, it's really not what you think it is, or, oh, I know Jason and that's not how he is. Being able to say, so I hear you saying that this is what your experience is here, and being able to unpack it from there. But another action, let's say that you're not in a leadership position and you're like, well, what can I do right now? It's the idea of broadening your network. And so I was doing a Q&A at the end of a webinar, I think a couple of months ago, and the speaker asked me a great question because her organization was focused on helping companies increase representation among females. And so she asked me, she said, how can organizations increase representation among Black women? You want to know what I said? I said, ask your employees to take inventory of how many Black women are in their personal networks. There's a direct link to your organization's ability to increase diversity in the workplace and each employee's network. If everyone at your workplace were to broaden their network and ensure that ensure diversity there, you will see higher levels of representation within the organization, especially organizations that really appreciate things like referral programs. So I talked a second ago, and I said it really quickly, the idea of the network gap. And if you do a quick Google search around, LinkedIn, and if you do a Google search that says LinkedIn and the network gap, you can see a lot of the data and the statistics around that, which talks about how, number one, there's a hidden job market where 70% of positions that get posted are likely filled. 70% of positions that are filled likely never make it to getting posted to the broader market, or they're filled by way of people that we know. And then the people within our networks, it heavily increases our ability to get opportunities. But if no one within our personal networks, that if our personal networks are homogenous, then that begins to reflect what happens in our workplaces. What if every employee within your organization's network mirrored your personal network? The closest 10 people, I even give you 10 people, 10. The 10 people that you spend much of your time with, or even the 10 people that you would go to that you could easily access on your end if you wanted to talk about careers. What if every employee within your company, what if their personal network matched yours? And you begin to get this idea of how this works. And now on to step 4. Now we get to talk about a very critical step, which is measuring impact. Another thing that I teach in our training programs is this idea of intention versus impact. And even though we may have had good intent or good intentions, because I like to believe that we are all good people, we still move beyond that to say that we will also measure impact of our actions and our behaviors. We will study the results through live observations, and we're also going to review the data as well too. The issue with intent versus impact is that most people get lost. Again, here's another loop that people get stuck in. They get lost, or they dig their heels in the mud at intent. They get trapped in the loop of, but I'm a good person. And the mere thought of asking me to measure impact means that you think that I might not be a good person. And I don't want anyone listening to this to get caught up in all of that. To measure impact means that you're asking, how are others experiencing the environment that I'm creating right now? This is especially important if you are in a management or leadership position. You can learn the answer to this question in a few ways, as a matter of fact. You can analyze engagement survey data. You can look at retention and turnover data. You can look at promotional data. You can study the results. You can look at data from a demographic standpoint, meaning what is the experience of veterans working here at our organization or those that are on my team. You can explore the data with an intersectional lens. And so, for instance, instead of just looking at the experience of women, for example, you can look at the data that shares the environmental experiences of women of color. Is their experience of the workplace different from the overall population? Or you can partner with HR to stay in the loop on exit survey data or exit survey feedback. And even recruiters can lean in to do 90-day check-ins with the people that they hire to come and work at your organization. Or you can pay attention to what's being said about your environment on platforms like Glassdoor. Or you can have one-on-one check-ins with employees, and you can just ask them, what is your experience like of working under my management style? As a matter of fact, when I was in corporate America, one of the things I used to do within my team, at least once a year, I would ask someone on the team to volunteer to collect information or results, but I would ask a question: what is your experience like while working on this team? And so that's an open-ended question. And then I would also say, what's one thing that I need to start doing, stop doing, and continue doing to be an effective manager or to create an inclusive work experience for you? And then this person who volunteered would collect all the information, and then I would receive it anonymously. So now I can sit and I can look at this information, intent versus impact. I intend to be a great manager, but the impact, now my team can share their impact with me. I can review it, and then I can share it transparently and vulnerably, because this is a vulnerable experience. And I can have an open conversation with my team, and we can talk about some of the things that I'm going to do moving forward. So I invite people to think about that as well too. So listen, I share this information. I always share the same closing message, especially when I'm talking to leaders, about how your role as a leader or a future leader is so critical to your organization's ability to increase representation, that moving forward, you have to get serious, get clearer, get better, get help, or get out. And so I say it, I show it here to you as well too. To get serious means that you take accountability for your role in understanding how bias affects hiring and promotion. To get clearer means that you consistently look inward at your own resistance. We're going to check ourselves. To get better means that you are always looking for new ways to improve yourself, and to see and disrupt opposition, any opposition that disrupts your natural flow to being a better manager or supporting your team. To get help means that you're checking yourself for your weaknesses and your resistance. And so again, for some, getting help may mean more education, and for others, getting help may mean therapy. And I'm a huge proponent of therapy. But if none of that works for you, and if you don't want to do the hard work that comes with the privilege of being a leader, because it is a privilege, then maybe it's time to get out. And to get out means that if you're unable to do any or all of the above, or you just don't want to, then perhaps, and again with no judgment, maybe you should consider being an individual contributor. It's something to think about. I always like leaving audiences with homework by answering this question for them. What is the very next thing, once this presentation has wrapped up, that you can do to move the dial? And so I want to introduce you to our Team JTC Start, Stop, Continue Challenge. Within the next 48 hours, I want you to identify one thing that you can start doing at your company to create a better work environment, and one thing that you can stop doing at your company that will also help to create a better work environment, and one thing that you are already doing to contribute that you want to make sure that, number one, give yourself a pat on the back, and number two, that you continue doing it. So I appreciate all of you, and thanks for listening not only to my story, but also to these recommendations as well. And then if you're looking for additional free resources, I actually just created a free platinum checklist for hiring professionals. And it's 10 things that you can stop doing immediately in order to increase diversity. So if you like it, have at it. Just go to jennifertardy.com/resources. So that's it. I'll turn it back over to you, Chandler.
Hey, Jennifer, what a presentation. And thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you for staying overtime. Thank you everyone for joining the session today. I loved it. Thank you for sharing your personal story, Jennifer. So many great learnings. For everyone else, all of our Leadership Academy participants and those who would like to join the session, please join us on Thursday as we will be talking about managing conflict and the power of feedback with Samantha Simmons of HubSpot. We'll be meeting at our usual time, 12 p.m. Eastern, and I dropped the RSVP links earlier. Also, please stay tuned for our upcoming WeWork Labs programs. We will soon announce what's coming next after Leadership Academy. Everyone who has a small business or a startup should be especially interested. So please stay tuned for more information. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. See you on Thursday. Bye. Thank you, Jennifer.